Okay, so it's time for the second iteration of the loading of the data warehouse. And now it's time to extend the data warehouse. And what we will be extending it with is the statistics and the values of the statistics. So I like to think about when and how this value appears. So in order for this value to appear, there has to be a combination of statistics and a player. So I'm going to need two anchors here. I'm going to need an anchor that represents statistics, and I'm going to need another anchor which represents the actual measurement of that statistic for this player. So I'm going to add two anchors in this case. I'll go back here to the model and add, no, not like that. They need to be connected like this, like that. So this one at the far end here will be the statistics. So I'm going to edit this and add the name of this one, statistic. So what properties does this statistic have? Well, it has this thing that looks like a group of some sort, and this is a more detailed description. So I guess these are the actual descriptions of the values, which are then grouped into these categories. So I'm going to add two attributes over here. One attribute that will contain the group name, so just grp like that. And another one that will contain the name of that variable, which is sort of the statistic detail. So in order for it to be in line with the group, I'm going to call this detail. So we're deviating a little bit from the naming convention that was used in the file, which of course is okay when you're working with a data warehouse. So this is what we have, detail and group. What I usually do when I've created the attributes is to think about, for an instance in this anchor, or the different instances, are we going to be duplicating any of the values in the attributes? And in this case, of course, there are going to be many of these details have the same group, so I'm going to be duplicating the group name if I create the model like this. So that's why this should be a knotted attribute. So we create a knot on top of that one, which is the statistic group SGR. And now we need to determine the size of the data type that holds the identity of this one. So it depends on how many different types of groups we have. So I can just do a quick check and see how many we have here in the file at least. And of course this number may grow over time as other types of statistics are becoming collected. So in this case you can see we have 378 rows, so it's more than fits into a tiny int, so I'm going to make it a small int, which leaves us plenty of room to grow. I'm also going to change this to generator because I want this to generate its own identity. This is a good thing if you're going to be loading the knot using data found in the file, but if you're loading it manually, then maybe you want to uncheck this so you can decide which numbers have, well, or whatever identity you pick, what they represent. So, but for loading from file, this is a good choice. Alright, so that's the statistic. The next thing we need to look at is the anchor in the middle, which is the measurement of the statistic for this player. So I'm going to call this measurement, ME. And this also needs an attribute, so go back here and look at it. What attributes should we have? Well, we definitely need the actual value. So I'm going back here and adding an attribute, which is the value. And this was also a character value. If you remember, we saw in the file earlier that it could be E for even, for example. So it could be just an alphanumerical value. And here I accidentally typed something. Oh, it's back now. So the next thing you need to think about, should this date also be an attribute over here? But in my opinion it shouldn't be, because if you add it as an attribute, then you're viewing this value as something of a transactional nature. But it's not. This is something that will change over time naturally. So it's something that you have that naturally changes at these points in time. You could, as a golf player, become better at putting on the greens, for example, so your statistic becomes better or worse over time. So it's actually something that is changing over time and not something that has a transactional nature, that is a one-off thing. So in this case I'm going to change this one to become a historized attribute instead. I'm going to change it to a historized one, and now what we have here, you can see that this the granularity here of this data type is just the day and not the time. So I'm going to remove the time part here and say that we're capturing changes on the date, on a date granularity. I also have to decide whether or not, when it's historized, if it's going to be restatable or not. If it is restatable, that means that if the same value appears at a later point in time, but it was already that value, it's still going to insert a new row. But I don't see the point in that right now. It's so I'm going to change that and make it idempotent as well, which means that if I now try to insert the same value consecutively over time, it will just keep the first date of that occurrence. Alright, so then we're done with that one. Then we need to name these roles in the tie. Player was measured for the statistic. So the player was measured for the statistic with this measurement and value. So this is the new model. It's extending the old one. So the next step is to generate the SQL code so we can actually implement this into the database. And when you implement things from an anchor model, what happens is that it will extend the existing model. That's the way anchor modeling works. So this is super quick. It's a very fast operation. Do a refresh and we can open this, and now you can see we have more tables than we had before when we just had the player and the player name. So once this is in place, the next step is of course to actually load data into the new part of the model. So I'm going to go back here to the target definition. It's still the same source file, so I'm going to copy this part and we can use this as a template. First, let's start with populating this statistics group that we had, this not value here. So because we need the values in the not to be present when we load the attribute values. So in this case it was SGR, statistic group was the name of the not. It should be over there. Yeah. In this case I want to select the distinct statistic. Otherwise it's almost exactly similar to when we loaded the player name, like that. And in this case the column is also SGR, statistic group. Oh, sorry, the target column is that. The source column is named statistic. So now it looks perfectly okay. We want this to be the natural key, so it's the unique name of the group that actually is the key for the group. So you can save this and we can run this again. Oh, no, we can't. I need to remove something here because what it's trying to do here, you can see it's producing an error message here. It's we have provided support for BIML code, So it generates BIML from which you can create integration services packages, but this is not done yet for the knots. So if I remove this folder BIML here, then it will work, because it's not even going to try to create the BIML code. So removing it, and it's complaining about this, of course, because the metadata column in this table is metadata SGR, as you can see here. So I'm changing that, save and rerun, and there it is. So now we should have a new step in our loading job, which we of course haven't got yet, because we need to go here to the workflow, and we will add that step. Right after this one, we'll add the loading of the knot, SGR, statistic group. And in that case, the name of this one is SGR, statistic group. Okay, save and rerun again. Now if we look at the job, the loading job, do the properties, steps, you can see that we have this new step that we defined, which is load statistic groups. If I check it out, it's going to call a stored procedure called statistic group PGA stats typed. So let's try it. Let's see what happens. And afterwards, which should be able to, could have been. So we'll view the history here and see what happened. It's in that one anyway. Could not find stored procedure. What did I call the, oh, SGR statistic group. Go back to the workflow. I accidentally put an extra underscore in there. So rerun. Now it will have recreated the job here. So if we go back, look at the properties and the steps, and open up that step again. As you can see, now the underscore is gone. So this is the benefit of actually working with a metadata driven framework, because it's super simple to change something and then you regenerate everything basically, and it's a really quick way to do development. And it's also great because you maintain all of your code in a single place. So okay, now that is done. So let's have a look and see if there's something in our not table. Yes it is. So here you can see all of the different statistics groups that we have. All of the 378 groups. And that makes me wonder how many variables we have. So let's just have a look there. Probably quite a few, because that's the next step now. We need to load that into data warehouse. 1496. So quite a lot of different types of statistics are being collected here. Okay, so let's go back here to the target. So the next step is then to load the statistics anchor. Oh, let's copy the player one here again and add this down here. So in this case, I'm going to change that to LST statistic to indicate that this is what we're loading. And then now I want to load the unique combination, because that's the natural key of a statistic. Oh, I need to do that. And as you can see here, this combo is what is uniquely identifying a statistic. So I'm going to grab the statistic there, and this is going to be a part of the natural key along with the variable as well. So let's have a quick look at the latest view, which is what we're loading here, the LST statistic, to see what the column names are. So here you can see the column name of the statistics group. This is part of the natural key, so this is what is named, the column is statistic in the file. So we need another part here, which is also a part of the natural key. So we're going to map this variable to, we call it detail. Yeah. Detail. Like that. And both are part of the natural key, and the metadata here is metadata st for statistic. Save that, and working very agile, we can test that, and it's incorrect syntax, comma sign missing. Okay, going back down now to the actual job here, we can just make sure that we have another step, and I always forget this because now we don't have a step. Go to the workflow and we add another job step. We can just remove that, and it was LST statistic. Okay, so now we should have another step in the workflow as well. Steps, and now we have the load statistics step there. And if I rerun this now, should be perfectly safe, and we shouldn't get any new values or duplicates in the statistic group because we had defined the natural key there. So we can go back here to the actual query. Where was it? Oh, maybe I closed it. So we'll go back later and check here again in the let's check the not table statistic group, and still 378, or even though I now loaded it more than once. And let's close the tables and go to the latest statistic. Now there should be one for each. I think we had 1,400 something. Let's remove the top. 1,496. So here you can see the detail name and the name of the actual group. So all of these details, the first 6 here, belong to the same group. So next we'll be looking at loading the actual measurements with the historization as well. This will be a little bit trickier because the key for the measurement is actually spread out. It's not available directly on the anchor. The key for the measurement is actually found as a combination of something on this anchor and this anchor. It's the name and the detail and the statistic group together that is the natural key here. But we'll save that for the next part. So we'll look at that soon. Thanks.